Good morning, everyone, and welcome to VetNet. My name is Ashley Squires, and I am the Manager of Alumni Services for Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families. For those of you watching this webinar and are unfamiliar with the IVMF, the Institute offers no cost programs that support all aspects of service members, veterans, and their families' post-service lives, from navigating community services support through our America Serves program to professional certifications for in-demand careers and employment through our Onward to Opportunity program, as well as entrepreneurial training through our IVMF Arsenal that is comprised of 8 national entrepreneurship programs. One of our initiatives here at IVMF is VetNet, which is what you are all watching this live stream webinar through today. And today's session will focus on the 7 C's of leadership with Glenn Richardson. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Glenn Richardson. Glenn is the founder of Leader Sages and is a noted leadership coach, executive consultant, and industry advisor. He specializes in helping new and developing leaders gain the confidence in their leadership abilities, develop and sustain meaningful, purposeful relationships, and enable growth in both individuals and organizations. He assists organizations with critical decisions regarding strategy, operations, and growth, and helps businesses link operational objectives with organizational strategies. Glenn's experience includes key consulting and operational leadership positions. He is a former partner at Arthur Andersen LLP, where he led the strategy, finance, and economics practice and received 3 consecutive Consultants' Choice Awards for coaching, leadership, and mentorship. Glenn is also a former partner at Deloitte LLP, where he championed an innovative managerhood program to provide newly promoted managers with leadership, counseling, engagement, management, and personal development skills. In addition, Glenn is the former president of FedBid Inc., where his customer relationship mastery and leadership development skills drove strategic relationships, networking, corporate eminence, and market expansion. Glenn's military assignments include the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, U.S. Special Operations Command, U.S. Army Europe, service in Operation Desert Storm, and the Joint Staff. He is a graduate of multiple military institutions and leader development programs, from the 82nd Airborne Division's Primary Leadership Academy to the U.S. Naval War College. Today, Glenn is going to walk us through the 7 C's of leadership, and we'll discuss how they can drive personal growth and business success. I will be moderating the YouTube chat channel through the course of this session. If any of our live viewers have questions for Glenn during this session, feel free to type them into the chat channel off to the right of the viewing pane, and we'll make sure to leave time towards the end of this webinar to answer as many questions as possible. So Glenn, welcome to VetNet, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ashley. It's my pleasure. And hello, everyone. I'm Glenn Richardson, and I'm also broadcasting this from the Institute for Veterans and Military Families here at Syracuse University. Okay, off and running now. It is my pleasure to be with you today from the IVMF here in Syracuse. It's a beautiful day in upstate New York, and to join you with 7 C's of leadership. Let me begin with my story. I was fortunate. I was fortunate because I had good leaders early in my career. People who cared, people who mentored, people who disciplined, people who were the embodiment of competence, of courage and commitment. People that were really served as role models early on for me and enabled me to model my own style of leadership to serve and still learn in those positions, and then my background that Ashley so brilliantly described. In fact, I actually feel humbled by the description there, Ashley. But nevertheless, I learned early on because I was in this environment of good leadership. And I've often wondered, what if I had not encountered all of those great leaders and great leadership cultures early in my career? What if I'd been in environments that were, to use a popular term, toxic? What if people had not cared? What if people had focused more on the disciplinary aspects of leadership rather than the positive reinforcement? Would I have been then jaded when I finally encountered good leadership later in my career? Skeptical? Unable or unwilling to accept good leadership? Not sure. I'm not, and I'll never know that. But here's what I do know. organizations and individuals who lead, or organizations and individuals who succeed. And those organizations and individuals who do not develop themselves as leaders or develop leaders from within, well, often fail. Hence the importance of leadership. Today, I'd like to share some lessons learned, 7 C's of leadership, most gained from personal experience, adding stories where I can. At the end of each C, which are 7 words that begin with the letter C that have worked for me. Later, I'll be asking for some of your words to stimulate some discussion. And to explain each of those briefly, but end each one with one of my Richardson's rules. Richardson's rules are kind of a compendium of, I'm probably up to 83 different rules. I actually started writing it in Operation Desert Storm. Rules about life and love, and in this case, leadership. I'd like to share those with you to make points on each of the 7 C's. Again, it's a pleasure to be with you today. And let's begin with the 7 C's preceded by a definition or 2 or 3 of leadership, including my own definition of leadership. So if I go to the dictionary, I get a somewhat clinical, but certainly illustrative definition of leadership: process by which a person influences others to accomplish an objective and directs the organization. It talks about cohesion. Fairly clinical. Now, let's move into those of us as veterans. You know, every service has a manual or a directive or an instruction on leadership. I picked mine from the Army Field Manual 6-22, which of course titled Leadership. Here we get into the people component. Leadership is influencing people by providing that purpose and direction and while operating to accomplish the mission. But remember that people aspect of this. Now, let's bring an Army personality into this. Not only an Army personality who served as one of the last 5-star generals in the Army, but also later served as President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Look at the humility in this statement, taking responsibility of everything that goes wrong, and yet giving your subordinates credit for everything that goes well. Well, I looked through all of this, and frankly, this simple soldier came up with his own definition. For me, I had to look at the difference between management and leadership, because what I found is too often people are promoted to leadership positions as a result of their demonstrated expertise and competency in management. And for those of us who are veterans, we get the leadership training. It's all around us from whatever service we're in or whatever our specialty or MOS or branch, it's all around us. Yet some of our colleagues who didn't have that experience arrive in the leadership ranks, well, not too familiar with it. I submit they are hungry to learn. They want to learn. Many times they reach out to us veterans to help them. But nevertheless, there's a difference between management and leadership, hence my definition. The difference between management and leadership, real simple. You manage things, you lead people. So from here, let's proceed to my 7 C's. These are the 7 words that have worked for me, and again, I'll explain each one, beginning with character, courage, communication, challenge, connection, commitment, and culture. The 7 C's. Let's start with character.
Glenn, if I could interrupt you for a moment. When you're talking about character, if you want to share some slides, because I'm not sure you shared them at the very beginning, but if you wanted to move over to share some slides about character, or if you're coming off at that point, just feel free to, because I think we missed the first one. But if you do want to share anything about character, just go into that now.
Okay. I will go into character, and I'll go right into that now then. Okay. Character. Ashley, is it okay if I back up for a minute to show a couple of those definitions?
Oh, of course.
Okay, very quick for everyone. Okay, all right. Leadership defined. Here's the dictionary definition I mentioned. We talk about influences others to accomplish objectives. The Army Field Manual, influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation. General and former President Dwight D. Eisenhower's very humble statement about taking responsibility for everything that goes wrong and giving subordinates credit for everything that goes well. And then the last one, my own definition, the difference between management and leadership. Managing things, you lead people. So let's fast forward then to character. Character. What's character all about? Character involves taking a bit of a moral inventory to figure out, what do you really stand for? What defines you? What do you want to be known for? Things like integrity, things like truth, things like conviction. Defining really, what is your legacy as a leader? When people think of your name, what's your brand? And what are some of those leadership characteristics that are tied in for that? Well, the corollary of that is, what won't you tolerate? And I'm not talking about minor annoyances or things that you can, accept, but you can still live through. I'm talking about absolute showstoppers, things that are so diametrically opposed to what you stand for that it's just something that you won't tolerate. As you look at it, I just can't live with this, because I've had too many situations where, well, there's a situation where the character was out of sync with my own. And I thought things would change. In fact, they didn't. I've ended up being very frustrated. So it all starts with knowing yourself. And by knowing yourself, it helps you understand what you stand for and what you won't tolerate, and knowing your limits on each side. Now, the fourth bullet, I've seen this attributed to everyone from Sun Tzu to Winston Churchill to that popular author Anonymous. But regardless of the attribution, let me call your attention to that last sentence. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. This goes back to that whole legacy of what you want to live. And walk the walk of honesty and fairness and these other great qualities of leaders. And I'm sure you have some as well that you could add in for what you stand for, what you won't tolerate and all. As I mentioned, let me leave you with the Richardson's rule. Even though I've got about 83 of them, this is my first in every presentation I do that involves the rules. Integrity is paramount and non-negotiable. Once compromised, you can't ever fully recover. Therefore, practice it, cherish it, and protect it. The next C, courage. Let me move back to, if I may, the video now and move on, okay? So what is courage really? When I summarize it, I see that courage is the conviction to do the right thing, especially when you're faced with a difficult right and an easy wrong. It's standing that moral high ground to do that right thing. Even though the pressures around you, it may be very easy, but that takes courage, takes conviction, and it takes support. Often, leaders stand alone there, but at the same time, the courageous leaders, we think about the really courageous leaders that are willing to do that. As I think of them, I can think of people, see their faces now. They're the people that I follow. They're the people that I learn from. A second aspect of leadership is acknowledging the impact of change, and particularly the fear of change. And this has a very real business example that I'd like to share with you. And the business example, let me take you back 10 years, maybe 15 years, to, let's put yourself in the position of a weekend coming up, a Friday evening, and you're preparing yourself or your friends or your family for entertainment that weekend. And let's say you went to a local shopping mall, strip mall, into urban or suburban and everything. And your routine on a Friday night might be picking up a pizza, picking up food or something, going to the grocery store, getting kind of set for the weekend. And then you also wanted to get set for weekend entertainment, right? So there was another famous store that typically would be part of that Friday night routine, that everyone would get ready. Everyone would get ready for that weekend to be entertained. Anyone thinking of what I'm talking about? Let me give you a hint. This was in the days before video streaming. Think blue background and gold letters. We're getting there, right? Of course, I am talking about Blockbuster. Remember Blockbuster? Blockbuster Video. Look at this statement from 20 years ago. Investor concern over the threat of new technologies is overstated. Okay, what do you think some of those new technologies included? What do you think? Streaming video, among other things. Now let's look at the history of Blockbuster as compared to the rise of Netflix. Okay, Blockbuster's founded, it moves along. Netflix founded, it's valued at 50 million in year 2000. I understand it was about that time that Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for the paltry sum of 25 million. But look what happened. Valuation at the end of 2017 over 65 billion. At the end of 2018 over 80 billion. Look at Blockbuster. Now, to my knowledge, there is one remaining Blockbuster store in the world today. I don't even know if it sells videos anymore, or is even in the media business. Nevertheless, something that we just used to take for granted, it was around because it had CDs, and before that tapes we took home. Streaming video came in and completely crushed it. Fear of change, or actually ignoring the signs and everything, that is what can paralyze. That's what can paralyze. So again, getting back to the notion of leadership, not only conviction to do the right thing, but acknowledging that impact of change and seeing just how big the fear of change, or not acknowledging what's in the tea leaves, or what's in the future, or what's happening, particularly with emerging technologies or emerging practices, can it can have devastating effects on a business. So let's bring it back to a personal level. What does it really mean, for you as a leader, for us as a group of leaders, when we find ourselves perplexed, when we find ourselves in the midst of a change and not really sure what to do? Well, that's where I roll into my Richardson's rule. Reaching out for help is not a sign of weakness. Neither is saying no. My next C is communication. A key about communication, be it written, be it oral, be it transmitted, be it digital. There are 4 sub-C's in this, if you will. Communication has to be clear, it has to be concise, it has to be consistent, and it has to be delivered constantly. Think about that. Your communications, clear, concise, consistent, and delivered constantly. So often when I'm looking for things like this, and it comes to me, I'm a visual person. I want an example. Let me offer a good example of communications that fits this. It is Amazon's annual letter to shareholders. In fact, if you Google it, you find some wonderful documents out there, typically released in April or May of each year and restricted to 6 pages. It is largely written and authored directly by Jeff Bezos, and it's regarded as some of the 6 best pages of reading in business today. Why? Because Jeff gets to the point. He covers all the big things. He thanks his employees, over 600,000 Amazonians in the world today. He talks about new initiatives, the HQ2, that will be opening in Northern Virginia, expansion into international markets, accolades and customer service recognition that Amazon has won. He sets the course for the future. He sets expectations in it. And it's something that not only people that are employees of Amazon's or Amazonians, but people who are shareholders and those of us that are customers of Amazon or suppliers. It gets very concise and very good. So I commend it to you. You can Google it, Amazon annual letter to shareholders. And it's also interesting that Jeff attaches his first annual letter to shareholders from 1968. So you can compare kind of his first vision and everything from the last one. It's great reading and a great example of communications. Speaking of communication, let me mention to you that from my perspective, what's the most underrated leadership communication skill? For me, listening. In fact, I'll be doing a VetNet in the future about the power of communication, not just hearing, but listening, and the importance of listening. But too often, that people may hear, but they're not really listening. And as Dr. Stephen Covey said, the problem is that most people don't listen to understand, they listen to respond. Think of that difference. So leadership, if we as leaders become better listeners, we in effect become better leaders. So my communications, Richardson's rule, no matter how fantastic your message is, if no one is receiving it, you're not communicating. My next C is challenge. Challenge. Challenge is a constant of leadership. We have challenges all around. Challenges, that are generated by multiple different angles, different directions, different timing related with challenges. But the bottom line here is that people need leadership, and they need leaders who can respond to those challenges or help people get through those challenges. Now, from my experience, I've found that most challenges leaders face are, in fact, people related. Most challenges are people related. They may manifest. You may have a challenge that manifests itself as, let's say, a technology challenge, a facilities challenge here in the room, a supply chain challenge, a logistics challenge, an operational challenge. That what I found is when you really start looking at the root cause of a challenge or a problem, and you start peeling it back to see what the root cause is, I have found more often than not, it is a people-related challenge. Someone didn't communicate properly. Somebody misunderstood. There was a conscious or unconscious bias between two or more people that resulted in a people issue that manifested itself as a real challenge. And you know what? Leaders respond to those challenges quickly, decisively, and resolve issues. In fact, good leaders will look for problematic situations and start mitigating them and applying their leadership to keep a full-blown challenge or a full-blown issue from developing. It's called situational awareness, isn't it? So let me leave you with the Richardson's rule about people and challenges. Another simple one, but and from my experience, meaningful. Ignore your people and they'll go away, right? Ignore your people and they'll go away. The next C is connection. Let's face it, we have a connection right here in this very broadcast. We're veterans. We have a connection with each other. Which it gives us a common ground. But think of other ways you can connect. You can connect through the power of relationships. Relationships define us. More on that in a moment. The strength of our networks, not wiring connection and bandwidth networks, but this type of network, the kind of networks we form personally and physically, we form virtually, we form through social media, we have networks. Think of that power, that we are connected, we have something in common, or we are connected with others because of differences. The fact that someone is different, we like to connect with them. This all comes into leadership because through connections, we look at the possibility of teams. We building teams, often diverse in composition, which from my perspective makes it a stronger team. But the power of those teams and the possibilities through the solid connections, it's one of the remarkable things of leadership, getting in front of teams and seeing just what people can do with a little bit of basic guidance, some resources, and let them be creative. It's the power of teams. And it all gets back to connecting and being visible and working together, as well as developing a diverse team. So let me end this with the Richardson's rule. And I want to recall, if I can, or I can recall, but if I may, the best definition of consulting that I ever heard actually describes some of my consulting career. And it has to do with 4 simple words. Those 4 words are: consulting is about relationships. Now, you could substitute whatever business you're in or whatever you're doing with the word consulting in that context and think about it, because life is really about relationships, isn't it? Everything we do, compare it to the phases of a relationship. Okay, we find relationships, we grow them, we advance them, we mature them, we nurture them, we repair them. In some cases, we terminate them. But life is truly about relationships, and our relationships define us. Life is about relationships. I'm going to switch now back to the slides for my next C. Commitment. Leaders are committed. Leaders, regardless of their purpose, they are purpose-driven, they are committed to leading. It's through this commitment that gives great leaders the ability to never give in, the conviction to unify, and the vision to form a dream. Now, leadership is a decision. I know some of you are thinking maybe, wait a minute, I was thrust into a leadership role because there was a vacancy. I was pushed into a leadership role because the company expanded or my role expanded. Um, Someone left and I was put in the role. Okay, I, I get that. Some people don't have that first leadership position as a result of a conscious decision. But to stay in a leadership role was a decision. So inevitably, either if you're either pushed in it or an opportunity creates itself or you step up, or leadership is a decision, particularly to remain. That's important. It's also an obligation. The weight of leadership can be very heavy on your shoulders and elsewhere, but it is an obligation to serve with humility, an obligation to be people focused, yet at the same time, whatever your organization's function or mission or goal is, to do whatever you can to support that and work with other leaders. Leadership is hard work. Let's face it, leadership is hard work. It's about rolling up your sleeves, literally or figuratively, and doing work. One of the old things that often heard early on in military leadership is never ask your people to do anything that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself or that you've already done yourself. Or those three simple words: lead by example. Get in and do something yourself. And I found that actually inspires others to do it. But it's hard work, yet it can be so much fun. It can be so much fun when you're really into leading and you're passionate about it. Then it's like work yet fun, work yet rewarding. So for me, hard work, yeah. Do I love it? Absolutely. And going back to the notion of connections and community, it takes a community. It takes all of us who are focused on leadership, whether we're new, whether we're awaiting our first leadership position or the first opportunity, or we're moving up in different levels of leadership, or we're going from a large position to a smaller position, particularly for those of us who stepped out of large organizations and started our own endeavors and all. But it takes a community. I didn't think of these 7 C's on my own, and I go back to I was fortunate beginning. It was other people that influenced me and that I understood and everything that helped me develop into a leader, and then helped me focus on helping others develop as leaders. So my rule here: you always control less than you think, and you always influence more than you realize. So a basic rule about leading, particularly in complexity, is that you always control less than you think, and you always influence far more than you realize. So if you try to exercise control, over something that, if you try to exercise control that you really don't have control over, you're only going to get frustrated. So think about it, and never underestimate the influence, the absolute influence that you have as a leader. And finally, culture. Yes, it's that culture thing, as they say. Like character, this is a group point. Culture is not formed. It's the character of a group. You have characters in an individual, but it's a group point. So what is culture really? Okay. And how do we understand the difference between climate and culture, and what is that leader's role? Well, let me illustrate. Okay. The iceberg analogy here. If we look at what's above the iceberg, that's typically what organizations define as their culture. It's the plans and vision. It's based on reason and logic. Everything is very logical. It's your typical MVV for those familiar with the mission, vision, values, those kinds of things. But let's look below the iceberg. That's climate. That's how things really are. That's what carries people forward, because it's based on team communications, what they understand, and emotions. This is where we get into feelings. We've already talked about fear. I mentioned biases before. Traditions of an organization, beliefs, individual beliefs, collective beliefs, habits. A leader's role is to make sure that the culture is, one, announced, and there's a balance. There's a balance between that announcement of culture and formation. The leader's job is to form the culture, not only form it, but sustain it, and also have flexibility to change it when things are not going right, or keep it current with the time, so the business is relevant even if it's a one-person business, keeping yourself relevant, and to make sure that the culture acknowledges both pieces of this iceberg. Okay, sure, we've got our plans and vision, but as leaders, are we aware of what's really going on? And is what's really going on misaligned or out of sync with that culture? And what do we as leaders need to do to align it? I finally call your attention here to this quote in the bottom right corner of the slide. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, attributed to management guru Peter Drucker. In fact, I've seen this quote cited as that he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Nevertheless, you see the importance of culture. Here's another thing I like. It gets back to people, right? Because people are loyal, not to the strategy, but to the culture. How many of you watching this today or listening to it later have ever been in an interview and you're the interviewer, and somewhere during that interview you realize that the person you're interviewing is actually interviewing you, because that's what they're doing. They're saying, hey, do I buy what this leader is doing? Can I follow this person? Does this organization this leader is representing, does it have a culture that I can really buy into and be a part of? Okay, that's what it's all about, because people are loyal to that culture. My Richardson's rule here. This has to do about addressing a potential disconnect, and it's based on personal experiences. And I use yellow lights as an analogy because think about when we're driving. What do we do when we see a yellow light? Oh, sure. Yeah, we always stop and exercise caution, look both ways, right? Right. Nope. We hit the gas, we twist the throttle, we move through it as quickly as possible. And yet these yellow lights in life that give us warning signs, or at least give a suggestion that we should stop. We should stop, we should look around and say, okay, is this really something I want? And if you see a disconnect between who you are, your character, what you represent, and you see that, hey, there's a disconnect here between what this organization is all about and me. Or if being a leader, you're about developing and respecting people, and you sense, you feel a culture that's not focused on that, my advice, be ready to walk away from it. It can only be a frustrating experience. The 7 C's: character, courage, communication, challenge, connection, commitment, culture. Those are 7 C's that have worked for me. Now, what are some of your C's and A's and B's and D's? I'd like to start a discussion here about what are some characteristics or words that when you think leadership or leaders that come to your mind. I'd like to get your perspectives.
Thank you, Glenn, for sharing that. And as we wait for a few individuals, if anyone does have a C or one of the other letters of the alphabet that they think of when they think of leadership, we'll let them put them into the chat. Oh, I think we just had one come through from Kelly. And this is what I was going to say, too, if we didn't have anyone participate in the chat, was authenticity. And, do you have any thoughts about how you'd put authenticity or even dedication as you connect them to leadership?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the first word I thought of about authenticity was also transparency. That we are authentic, that we represent who we are by our transparency. And if we're transparent, then, the authenticity, I think, follows. It means being real. It means being truthful. I think for a leader, it means having the capability to make a couple of statements that can be hard for some people, like, I'm wrong, okay, or my mistake, or we messed up, or I messed up, and taking this whole responsibility. That's really being authentic. I'm also thinking about the quotation earlier from former President Dwight Eisenhower, the one that I scrolled over so quickly, not realizing it wasn't visible. But this whole notion of being authentic enough and confident enough to give credit to the people that are working for you or your team for things that go well. But when things don't go so well, or you have a negative unintended consequence, stepping up to the plate and saying, I am responsible. For me, that's where authenticity fits into this, and I really like it. I really like it as one of the tenets of leadership.
Yeah. And two
Thank
other
you.
ones that came in were dedication and competency, which I think really bleeds right into, your last statements about authenticity, about, really owning and being, competent about what you're saying, but really dedicated to whether you mess up and you have to admit it, or whether you're going forward with whatever your vision and culture is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And competency is interesting because there are certain organizations where the leader is expected to be as fully competent as the people, as the people in the organization. Let's say it's a very technical type of organization, then probably the leader is expected to maintain both a technical competency as well as demonstrate leadership. As opposed to, let's say, an organization that needs a customer recovery, or someone that can expand the imminence of the organization, or a turnaround type of leader, leaders that absolutely are known for coming into an organization that needs a turnaround. And there are some very famous leaders that do that. Whether or not they know the technical ins and outs of the business, they know how to turn a business around, or they know how to reconnect with customers and all. So competency on that, that's the technical side. But there's also the leadership competencies that leaders develop and hone, and particularly as they advance in greater positions of leadership, they may find that they are have more direct reports, or their direct reports have more direct reports. Leadership in a matrix organization, particularly for someone's first time, and through a consulting career, I'm very, very used to matrix organizations, but I've seen others, particularly coming out of a more hierarchical organization, that really have to learn what it takes to navigate a matrix and be comfortable with it. And that takes that's a competency all in itself, because for some it appears very confusing or ambiguous at first. Yet once they develop the competency of that, they're able to understand the matrix and operate it very well.
Great. Thanks so much. And if anyone does have additional questions for Glenn at this time, you can please enter them into the chat channel to the right of the viewing pane. And while we're waiting for, one or two questions to come in before we end the session, I have a couple questions for Glenn.
Okay.
The first one is, how do the 7 C's benefit someone if they don't consider themselves in a leadership position?
If they don't consider themselves in a leadership position, well, good question, Ashley. But even though I say these are 7 C's of leadership, and I have leadership context to them, even if someone is not in a leadership position, let's say they're a sole contributor or something, I would still think things like character. Let's start with character, but character or communication still very important. And also for those that may look at themselves and say, well, I'm not in a leadership position yet I aspire to be. So these 7 C's, I don't see in any way are exclusive of people who aren't currently in leadership positions, but certainly for those who aspire to be, and certainly those who are still, part of an organization. The guidance for things like knowing yourself and understanding what you can tolerate, what you won't tolerate, of keeping your communications clear, of understanding the power of teams, of reaching out for help. I wouldn't say are necessarily confined to leaders. I just found those particular 7 C's helped me in my leadership roles, and helps me today coach others in leadership.
Great, thank you. And another question that came in was, is there a specific C I should start with when trying to incorporate all 7 C's into my professional life?
The first C that to gravitate toward, I think the one to grab is the first one, character. I think it all begins with character. And remember, going back and assessing yourself, really knowing yourself, really knowing yourself, and kind of having that introspection, that looking in the mirror and determining, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. These are the limits of my toleration. This is who I aspire to be. These are some characteristics that I've seen in others, or I've read about, and they're things that I want to develop in myself. I'm not there yet, but I'm willing to reach out for help. I'm willing to reach out for mentorship, reach out to others, and develop those within myself. and then setting aside, hey, these are things I won't tolerate, so I won't wander into, areas. I'll identify those things early before I get stuck to something and I'm miserable. But I think it comes back to character, really defining yourself. What do you want to be known for? What's your legacy? What great positive attributes do you want when someone thinks of your name and to describe you? So for me, it's character.
Great, thank you. And I haven't seen any additional questions come in through the YouTube chat channel. So what we'll do is we will provide Glenn's contact information in our follow-up email after this, for if anyone does have any questions, or if you're not viewing the live broadcast, but viewing the recording of this at a later time, you could follow up with Glenn directly if you do have additional questions. So Glenn, at this time, I would like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's VetNet and providing everyone with very valuable information. For everyone viewing the live session, we will post this webinar on IVMF's VetNet page for future viewing access and for you to share with others who you think may benefit from viewing it. We'll also be sending the recording link, Glenn's contact information, and a short survey to all of those who RSVP'd for today's session via our Eventbrite link. I ask that you please fill out this short survey. It really helps us to make sure that we're providing valuable content to you for future VetNets. And as Glenn mentioned previously in today's session, be on the lookout for future VetNet webinars with Glenn, as this is the first one of a series that we'll be doing with Glenn. And our next VetNet will be on examples of service franchise opportunities on Thursday, August 1st at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can visit our VetNet website, ivmf.syracuse.edu/alumni, to learn more about VetNet, register, and see more of our upcoming VetNets in the future. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.